boroughs ban. Right.
Okay. I'm not going to pretend like I know.
They'll do it when she comes up.
Oh, they'll do it? All right.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I must say that in the absence of our great dean, Mark Wigley, who injured his ankle and had surgery yesterday, so I am filling very big shoes here, especially when he's got the cast on. But it is my great, great honor and privilege tonight to introduce Amanda Burden. I'm going to read a little official bio and then add to it a bit. Amanda M. Burden, FAICP, is the chair of the New York City Planning Commission and director of the Department of City Planning. Since her appointment by Mayor Bloomberg in 2002, she has spearheaded the largest planning effort in the city since 1961, setting the stage for sustainable development, reclaiming New York's waterfront, designing new parkland and public spaces, such as the High Line, and promoting great architecture and urban design in all 5 boroughs. I just wanted to add, on a personal note, I had the great privilege of being Amanda's Manhattan director from 2001 to 2005. Many of you have heard about Amanda, read about Amanda. I thought I should add a couple of things that maybe are not so obvious. First of all, she's the hardest worker I think I have ever met. One of the key lessons for me in working with Amanda was the fact that she spent every hour, near as I could tell, that she had free walking every site that we were looking at. If a developer proposed something, if we were proposing something, she would walk every block. We would go into a staff meeting, and she always knew more about any given site we were talking about than anyone on the staff. And she would say, well, have you been there? Have you stood on that block? Do you know what that street corner's like? It was an extraordinary working experience for me. I learned a tremendous amount. I would also say that she has the keenest design eye that I've encountered in this city, which is interesting because her formal training from this great institution, she graduated in a master's in urban planning from here and published a thesis titled Securing a Future for Recycling, Processing the Critical Link to Market Development. So a very broad range of interests. Amanda has extraordinary political savvy. Watching her negotiate with city council and community members and making sure that everyone's voice feels heard is a gift, really, that she brings to the table. Amanda's won numerous awards, including the Nichols Prize from the ULI. She's often cited as one of the greatest city planning chairs in modern history. I will tell one short story about this, which is once someone said that while you were getting an award, and I was sitting next to Joe Rose, Amanda's predecessor, and Joe sort of looked a little sheepish, and you were wearing this fabulous gold lame dress, and I said, don't worry, Joe, I'm sure you look great in the gold lame as well. Right? But hard act to either proceed or follow. In fact, the New York Times raved that Ms. Burden is leaving an indelible legacy of how all 5 boroughs will look and feel for decades to come. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Amanda Burden.
Thank you, Vishon. We had incredible time together, and you'll hear a little bit about tonight. I can't tell you how really, really thrilled I am to be back at Columbia, at Avery. I spent so many incredible years here learning the craft of city planning and really understanding how important that was to the future of the city of New York. So let me take you through some of the initiatives that we have focused on at New York City. It's just an incredible time to work for a mayor who cares so much about every part of the city and making it one of the greatest cities really on earth. Now, you know, most of people, when people think of New York City, they think of New York's skyline and its skyscrapers and its density and its crowded sidewalks and its yellow cabs. But really what New York City is, it's a patchwork of different neighborhoods with different character and unique distinction about different neighborhoods. And it's our job at city planning to understand the diversity of these neighborhoods and really respond to communities' needs and opportunities. It's also central to our focus is economic development and making sure that New York City is competitive on the world stage. That is very, very important to our future. And it's also important that New York present opportunities to everybody, to come here, to start a business, to get a job, and to climb the ladder of life. And key to our success has always been our ability to welcome people from elsewhere. And we have to make sure that we keep those opportunities open and growing. Not only opportunities, but it's very important that we provide to New Yorkers and to anybody who wants to come here a quality of life in their lives, so that they not only choose to come here, but they choose to stay here. And during the past 8 years, that's what we have tried to achieve. So it's not just opportunity, but it's quality of life and the reasons that make people decide to come and stay in the city. So what we do at City Planning is to direct development of our business districts, our neighborhoods, our industrial areas, and our waterfront. And during the past 8 years, we have not done that. But not only that, the way we judge ourselves is how people view their everyday lives and how it feels, essentially, in the end, on the street when a project is developed. And my mentor was Holly White, William H. White, who wrote The Organization Man, but who was one of the great urbanologists of all time. And he always said, and I say this often because I believe it so much, you can measure the health of a city by the vitality of its streets and public spaces. And in fact, that's how I judge everything that we do. So let me tell you a little bit just about the history of the development of the population of New York City. New York City lost an enormous amount of its population in the 70s and the 80s. But you can see on this chart, you can see the general population growth of the country on top, but look at the trajectory of the population growth of New York City. It's just astonishing how lucky we are because we welcome our growth, but the challenge is how to accommodate it. So we expect to grow to 9.1 million people. We're at 8.4 million now by 2030. So our challenge is, how do we accommodate that growth in the city, but still keep the character of New York City's neighborhoods? In fact, what I often say is, what we want to do is, we have 188 neighborhoods. What we want to do is grow, but not change, and always keep the quality of life that exists in these different neighborhoods. Remember, each of these neighborhoods are completely different, and our goal is to grow in place, because the city's mostly built out, but to keep the quality of life, and that's what we've tried to do for the past 8 years. And underlying everything is a focus on sustainability, to make this city self-sustaining. The mayor announced Plan YC, our blueprint for sustainability, in April of 2009, and that is how we actually measure what we do. That's about not only transit-oriented development, which I'll speak about in a minute, but it's about cleaner air, cleaner water, a better, healthier quality of life for New Yorkers today and for generations to come. And that is absolutely key, and there'll be Plan YC 2.0 coming out next April. We're lucky. New York City, many of its neighborhoods are very dense around a very strong transit infrastructure. And New Yorkers can often go to their job, they can actually get their services, they can go shopping without getting in a car. They can we have a very rich transit network, and you see even the mayor here rides the subway. In fact, New Yorkers use 2/3 less energy than other US residents. So in fact, we are the most sustainable city in the whole country. And the mayor has charged us to even more to reduce our energy uses by 30% by 2030. But we often say that if more people move to New York, you'd be helping the national goal of reducing our carbon footprint, because New York City is indeed so sustainable. And I just like this little chart because we grew since 2000 by 355,000 people. And look at the average American uses this much carbon. New Yorkers use this much carbon. So if all those people moved elsewhere in the United States, it would be the equivalent of putting 866,000 cars on the road. So that's why it's good to move to New York, moved to New York City. So what we have done over the past 8 years is to actually, 8.5 years, is to reshape the land use blueprint of the city. So that, remember that, and many of you know that the zoning had not been looked at in the city since 1961. So where you could develop was often in auto-dependent neighborhoods, and growth was happening in the wrong places. So what we did is very logical. We didn't even call it transit-oriented growth. It was to steer all development around our mass transit network, and we have a very strong mass transit network, and to direct development away from auto-dependent areas. Right now, we judge also by where housing permits are. Right now, 87% of housing permits are within a 10-minute walk of a subway. The goal is by 2030 to have 95% within 10-minute walk of the subway. So we've essentially reshaped the, as I say, the land use blueprint of the city. We have taken through all the way through the public process 104 rezonings. These aren't small rezonings. They're usually 100 blocks. Right now we're about to take South Jamaica, 520 blocks. So we do these in large chunks. We have now rezoned 1/5 of the city, 9,000 blocks. So this is really, we've set the blueprint for generations to come so that we are one of the most sustainable cities in the country, and that effort will continue. The mayor said from the very start of this administration that he wanted economic development in all 5 boroughs. He wanted regional business districts, that's business districts with both housing and office space in each one of the boroughs, because that creates jobs and housing and economic investment. Each of these regional business or central business hubs is centered around mass transit infrastructure. So what we have done is look for opportunities to reshape underutilized areas into thriving centers of economic activity and investment. Each one is different. The mayor said, being a good businessman, create a different product for different customers. So you see Lower Manhattan is very close to downtown Brooklyn. Downtown Brooklyn would be a very good place for back office space that relates to Lower Manhattan. Long Island City with Midtown, et cetera. So this became kind of our focus in creating these business districts. We started, of course, with Lower Manhattan. After 9/11, this was a focus of the administration and the focus of this whole city, is to rebuild confidence in the city and its future. Now, you look at Lower Manhattan. Doesn't this look like one of the most gorgeous, fabulous places on earth? It has water on 3 sides, incredible architecture. But the truth is, even before 9/11, Lower Manhattan was suffering. It was competing with Midtown, and for a city that never sleeps, Lower Manhattan went to bed promptly at 5 o'clock. So we changed incentives in zoning to incentivize residential development, and now Lower Manhattan is a thriving center with schools and residents and cultural institutions and restaurants, all of these things that didn't happen. But after 9/11, as you may know, Lower Manhattan was given, the charge of Lower Manhattan was given over to the state. City didn't really have a role in Lower Manhattan, but we worked very closely with the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation to make sure that the World Trade Center site was integrated into the street network of Lower Manhattan, and we worked with them to try to integrate all the very separate neighborhoods of Chinatown and the financial district and Battery Park City to try to knit this as one community. But we were really worried about the financial district, because the financial district was really so fragile, and that is a key component of our economy. We get so much of our taxes from the financial industry that it was important to protect it. And if you see the orange square down there where it says Hanover Square, that's the financial district. And it essentially was cut off from the waterfront. There's really no amenity whatsoever. Impossible to get to Battery Park City. And the water's edge along north and south of the South Street Seaport was miserable, absolutely miserable. So it was totally landlocked, the financial district. So we designed a new waterfront. And we went to Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, and they gave us a large offsite grant of $150 million. and Vishan worked on closely on this as well. It's going to be one of the most spectacular waterfronts in the city and will rival public space like as fabulous as the High Line. It'll have a new pier, a double-level pier. It will have get-downs. It's in construction right now. It'll be open next year, the first piece of it, and a spectacular new waterfront for the city, for the financial district, for the new families that live there, and for tourists. So always we try to invest in public infrastructure, in public open space, because we realize this raises the value and changes the perception of an area. So we're very excited about this. Almost at the same time, a little bit later, we focused on what we call the Hudson Yards on the west side. Our financial district, our main financial district is Midtown. That is where our revenue and our jobs come from. When the mayor took office, there was only one large floor plate office building for a headquarters to locate, and it was taken by Bank of America. That was it. Now you can see what zoning does. I love this photograph because all the west side, you see the circle, that's Madison Square Garden. So everything west of that was zoned for exclusively industrial use, essentially killing what we love about Midtown. We like the density, we like the height, we like the energy, we like all that. And there was no way for our Midtown business district to expand. So instead of just zoning it, a blanket zoning of a commercial zone, we together, and Vishan was the master of this, we created an urban design master plan. And this included the office buildings, large floor plate office buildings are in the light blue, residential is in brown, this mixed use new neighborhood, high density, very, very high density, because that's what we need and that's what we want, threaded through with a whole network of public open space. And this would provide a new future. It's a huge 24 million square feet of office space, over 12,500 new residential units, and that's not even counting the eastern and western rail yards. Now, what the difference in the value between the industrial, the manufacturing zoning and the new zoning was enough to leverage the money to pay for the extension of the number 7 line, $2 billion. So this actually sets the future for the west side, because after you actually invest in infrastructure, transit infrastructure development follows. It's on time, on budget. This is the boring machine that went in, and I believe it's 2012 that it will actually open for public use. But this is a tremendous addition to the west side. I love this rendering. I call it God shining down on Hudson Yards. But you can actually see the east side and the west side merge into one vibrant, dense neighborhood. And there's many projects already under construction. This is a project which has not happened yet. It's one of the most important things. I'll say this is a picture of Penn Station in its glorious old days. What used to be when you arrived in Manhattan, this is how you used to arrive, like a prince. Now you scurry in like a little furry rat. But when we did the Hudson Yards zoning, this is Madison Square Garden, the circle there, and to the left of it is the Farley office building. This is the greatest place for transit-oriented development in the entire city. So when we rezoned the Hudson Yards, we allowed 5.4 million square feet to land on this site. As we examined this and worked very closely, again, Vishan wearing another one of his hats, to try to develop on the site, it became very complicated to build towers right on the site because you have train infrastructure and the trains have to keep going. We have at City Planning created an entire transfer district. Let me see if it'll just come up. There. We've studied every single site around Madison Square Garden because this is the place to transform Midtown. Also, in addition to the Hudson Yards, you have the best transit infrastructure. You have 4 different railroads going. You have the subway and the 3 different railroads all in one place. We've studied every site to accept 5.4 million and more on this site, and we're counting on Vishan to figure out how to make this happen because it's very important to the future of the city. So let me talk to you a little bit about some of the other business districts. I won't go through all of them, but I'll talk about downtown Brooklyn for just a minute for a couple of reasons. Like all the other business districts that I mentioned, they are focused around transit infrastructure. Downtown Brooklyn was very underzoned, but it was a great center both for academic institutions, cultural institutions for BAM, and also Metrotech was an existing business district. And then fabulous neighborhoods. You had Boerum Hill, Brooklyn Heights, and Fort Greene. but totally underzoned. Great opportunity here for development. So I'm showing you this because what we did was we created, again, an urban design master plan. And we began to use this technique of three-dimensional images to to give some sense of predictability of what might happen. We could see it at city planning what the zoning would look like, but it was a very important communicative tool to work with communities, because remember, none of our plans are worth anything unless they get adopted by the community, the borough president, and finally by the city council. So actually building this consensus is absolutely critical, essential. I can't do anything without it. And the key tool was using this three-dimensional master plan. In this particular one, office building in blue, residential apartment buildings in red, and the community could see how this would transition down into the existing low scale of the neighborhoods. And I'll just show you the next slide. This is what we used to do. This is all we showed a community when we rezoned them. This, in fact, is the zoning for downtown Brooklyn. But if you go to a community and say, you are going to have C64, not in a million years would they accept that. So we went back and used this tool. Now, all of this was focused on Flatbush Avenue and to have the high density around Flatbush Avenue and Metrotech. And again, as I mentioned, always to invest our scarce public funds in the streetscape. And Flatbush Avenue, as you might have noticed, under construction, it will look like this. It will finally become a gateway to downtown Brooklyn and really change the whole perception of the area. The MTA is investing in the J Street station, and this rezoning has now catalyzed 23 really huge development projects, which is absolutely key to building not only office but residential. Most of this is residential. And the goal, again, is always to create great places, and that is always our goal. Next, almost at the same time, we focused on one of the most famous streets in the world, 125th Street. 125th Street is the center of African American history and culture. Has incredible institutions of the Apollo and the Lenox Lounge, but the low density on 125th Street had really prevented a critical mass of developing on 125th Street, and these institutions were beginning to die because of lack of density. So all of that incredible history over the Apollo and these incredible theaters and the nightlife and the history of Malcolm X and the density of these sidewalks and the magic of 125th Street was really kind of withering away. And so we did a very complicated rezoning. This is what a rezoning plan looks like. And it had multiple goals. One was to preserve the character of some of the brownstones, that's in yellow on 125th Street, to catalyze density in the pink areas around the mass transit hubs. But the goal of 125th Street was about the entertainment and the cultural heritage of this incredible center of African heritage. And so we used zoning to achieve those goals. This looks like this is what we use as a zoning diagram, but this tells you what we did. We required 5% of every development to have an entertainment use. We created a bonus for creation of an arts venue, either for visual arts or performance arts. And we've never done this before. We prohibited banks from having more than 25-foot frontage anywhere on 125th Street. Fine to have their retail operations on the second floor. So all of this together gives you diverse retail, will give, when the market comes back, the critical mass of both entertainment, arts and entertainment on 125th Street to really make it what it is, its promise always has been and what it was in the past. And we're really, really excited about it. You can see a lot of vacant sites just poised to develop. And the hotels are beginning, and it will really take off as this incredible, exciting place to go in the day and in the nighttime. I'm unabashed at saying that the High Line is my favorite project that I ever worked on. I saw this incredible abandoned elevator rail line before I got this job, and I said, I can't help you, I have no power, but I'm totally in love with this project. This line runs for 22 blocks, a mile and a half. You can walk on it without coming in touch with a single vehicle. It was just absolutely magical, and I fell madly in love with it. And really knew right then that it could be the defining feature of a new neighborhood. And I don't know if you remember, that neighborhood was really just filled with car washes and car repair. Had the incredible art gallery district, and that needed to be saved, but it was also an opportunity to provide housing and affordable housing for New York. However, the previous administration really, really hated it. And they thought it should come down. They thought it was a blighting influence on the community. It was a rusty old thing, and just get rid of it. We developed a master plan, Vishan working very, very, very closely with me. And as we began to, let me just backtrack for a moment. The High Line was owned by the federal government, and CSX was the railroad in charge of it. And they said, we will not transfer this to the city. And when I was appointed to this, it became my #1 project to get it done. We will not transfer the High Line to the city unless every single property owner signs on. Well, there were 38 property owners who did not want the line. And as we began to talk to them, we found that they were property owners who owned land underneath and adjacent to the High Line. So again, Vishan is very much of a theme in this talk, but Vishan came up with an old, tried and true tool that we use, which is transfer of development rights. But it made all the difference. See the blue box? That's properties who underneath and adjacent to the High Line. By creating an entire special district and a transfer mechanism where anybody who owned land in that blue box could transfer their air rights to their property rights to anybody who owned land on the avenues, either 10th or 11th Avenue. We capped heights, but within that height, we reduced the height unless you bought the property rights from those property owners. They were thrilled. They signed on, 38 property owners. You know, the rest is history. We created one of the most extraordinary parks in the world, and you know, it's been open since June 2009. And we've had now 3.5 million visitors. And so it's become one of the unique destinations in the world, and great for tourism. With New York City has reached 47.5 million visitors this year have come to New York City. And they haven't all visited the High Line, but it's really great. And there was a significant public investment in this, but it triggered 37 development projects, and there are 34 actually projects that are actually going forward in this area. And some of the greatest architects in the world are just clamoring to build here. So it's been not only a incredible success in terms of public amenity, but in terms of economic investment, it has really worked. So investment in public space really does pay off, and it's we're going to be opening the next section in the spring of next year. Very excited about that. And as you can see, these views are absolutely great. You have Frank Gehry, Jean Nouvel, Annabelle Seldorf, Shigeru Ruban, all in one place. One of the most complicated and difficult rezonings in the past 8 years has been Coney Island. Now, there's no way that Mayor Bloomberg would lose Coney Island on his watch. Coney Island is beloved not only by New Yorkers, but from people all over the world. Coney Island means so much to people about what you can do when you come to New York for just a little bit of money. You can go to Coney Island, get a hot dog, go to the beach, go on a ride. Coney Island provided just something very symbolic to people all over the world. But it was dying. The rides had been purchased by a developer. One vacant lot after another was replacing the rides, and it was going to lose its sense of what it always had been to everybody. And so we said this is time to reclaim the mantle of Coney Island as the greatest open, this is how we saw Coney Island, remember, greatest open, affordable, and accessible urban amusement park in the entire world. And this is really, and look at the connection between the beach and the boardwalk and the rides. And you know, this is what it will become. So we created a comprehensive plan, and there was a lot of debate about what it should be. Should the rides be open and closed, whatever? Because the goal was to create a year-round amusement park that wouldn't close down in the summer. Coney Island just closing down now. It really should go all year round. The only way you can do that is to have some enclosed and open rides. And so I said, like Tunnel of Love. That's a perfect enclosed ride. And we went back and looked at the historic uses, and this is how it was. With steeplechase and everything else, there was a mix, always this mixed diversity. But we knew that the open amusements were very important. So we tried to combine all of these goals. And this is, I don't have a pointer here, but just on the bottom of the slide, that is the open amusement area. And we mapped it as parkland, and those who are your planners know if you map something as parkland, it's very hard to undo. So the open rides are preserved almost in perpetuity unless you go to the state legislature. But the rest of the area in blue is the amusement and entertainment district. So it's a 27-acre amusement and entertainment district with open and enclosed rides, but the lower part is the open amusement park, 12 acres, which really keeps that open connection to the boardwalk as well. Now, Coney Island's one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. It has huge unemployment, and almost all the housing is public housing. So it's very important to create a mix of housing there, both open and affordable housing, outside of the amusement area, because there's really a conflict there. So north of Surf Avenue and west of the baseball stadium, the Cyclone Stadium is housing, and the rest is amusement district. We have a transitional amusement park there now, as you probably know, while we rebuild the streets, because this is actually below sea level, so actually we have to rebuild the streets because of sea level rise and keeping them out of the storm surge area. But this is one of the greatest opportunities in the city, and just show you some images of them. This is what the Bowery looked like. We used images actually to sell these things. 1 million people used to come to Coney Island on the summer weekend. This is how we see it. Keeping all this diversity, but keeping the low scale, very important. This is how the boardwalk looks now. This is how it can look in the future. It is going to be spectacular. And again, one of the great places in the city. So we just love, love, love this project. New York is, in fact, a collection of great places. Each of its neighborhoods are different. Each of its neighborhoods have potential to be fantastic. As part of all of our rezonings, we try to balance preservation and growth. These are the brownstones in Bedford-Stuyvesant. We grow along Fulton Street where there's transit. We preserve the brownstones. In other areas where there's not mass transit, we really try to preserve those characters. So we are committed to maintaining the diversity of the city and growing wherever we can. In those areas where we can't grow, such as these very suburban neighborhoods of Laurelton and Rosedale and Bayside, and each of these neighborhoods we want to preserve their character and not allow them to grow. And by doing that, we actually give some predictability. We provide different options for different kinds of housing. We give predictability to both people who live there and to the development community. And most importantly, we grow in the right places. So transit-oriented growth is what we do. So transit-oriented growth is centered around our great mass transit system. We're growing at 2nd Avenue, 7th Avenue line. And we have the most fantastic transportation commissioner that we've ever had in the city, Jeanette Sidek-Khan, and she is doing everything she can to get people out of their cars or provide different options. Alternatives to automobile use is the best way to say it, so people have to use their car less. So this is bus rapid transit up in Fordham Road, and she just introduced on 1st and 2nd Avenue, I think only like a week ago, 10 days ago. She has laid 200 miles of bike lanes in the city, just remarkable. And the bike lanes are safe, so it's much more safe for people to bike in New York. On our part, we found that people were not using, often the biggest impediment to using your bike was you didn't have a safe place to park it, either at work or at home. And so we have passed legislation to require secure bike parking in every new residential and commercial building. So that will make a big difference as new buildings go up as well. Car share, very important. Most car share, we didn't anticipate car share in the zoning, so car share wasn't legal till about 2 weeks ago, and now it's legal in many of the parking garages in the city. Now it passes through the city council, so it's legal for car share companies to put their cars in any garage in the city. And as you know, car share means you don't only have to drive when you need to drive, you don't have to own a car and pay insurance, et cetera. Again, another option to owning a car. We actually found when we did our research that people who belong to car share A company actually either do not buy a car or give up their car. So it's really important and will make a tremendous difference in automobile use in the city. Of course, the best alternative to automobile use is walking. So we really, really, really focus on enhancing the pedestrian environment. So we also now require street trees in every new development. Street trees are important also for cooling, mitigating the heat island effect and capturing rainwater, et cetera. So you'll see trees, the mayor's pledged to plant 1 million trees by 2012. And we also require the planting of front yards. Okay, you wouldn't think this is a big thing, but in these suburban neighborhoods, they're concreting over their front yards, which can cause flooding in their basements and the sewer system. So by this green infrastructure, planting front yards, you actually enhance the pedestrian environment. It's also very good for our sewer systems. Parking lots, not allowed anymore. Not allowed oceans of asphalt. We have required in all large parking lots that there be bioswales that catches the rainwater, canopy trees to, again, cool, mitigate the heat island effect, and also it's much more beautiful. So this is how parking lots will look in the future. And one of the first things we did was, I love sidewalk cafes, but this is just a great way to enhance sidewalk life. And during the summer months, it really has transformed the city. It's one of the most difficult rezonings to do. Everybody was mad. But it really changes the city, and you see them all over the place. But that wasn't legal before this administration. So let me also mention, this is very important, you know, great architecture, it's important. It's important to keep the city young and dynamic and competitive. So we have really raised the bar for great architecture because we are a competitive city. We're a global city, and architecture helps us compete. And you've seen the Norman Foster Hearst building, the incredible Diller Scofidio, Alice Tully Hall, Zapata's building, the great new museum, Sana, got the Pritzker Prize this year, and Tom Maine's great engineering building. This is important to the city. So ever we can raise the bar for architecture, we do. But not only great architecture, high quality design and public spaces and design excellence is very important for our city to remain competitive. But it's not just cultural institutions or academic institutions, it's every building. These are low-income residential buildings in the Bronx, low income, and they look great. Great architecture gives a sense of pride of place and value. It makes people want to stay there, it makes people want to invest. And so everywhere, the bar for architecture is raised, and it makes an enormous difference in this city. So our idea we've been focused on is, you know, complete neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that give you, in the same place, housing, jobs, retail, open space. A very important part of that is affordable housing. So the inclusionary housing program is a key part of all of our growth areas, and that's to provide it gives a bonus for affordable housing within a height limit, and that's either for rental housing or now for home ownership housing, for low-income affordable housing in all of these districts. It's been a very important part of making sure that New York is a equitable city. As far as equitable city, it's important everybody in the city have access to fresh food. And you wouldn't think that was a big deal, but it's a big deal. We found supermarkets were closing all over the city, and working with Tom Frieden, the health commissioner, the former health commissioner, we found that where their supermarkets had closed, or neighborhood grocery stores to be more exact, there were high incidences of diabetes and obesity. In fact, they were ravaged by these two diet-related diseases. So we created a program which is called FRESH, and those initials stand for something, which gives both financial and zoning incentives for the creation of a neighborhood grocery store. Only passed 1 year ago, we have 3 in the Bronx created by FRESH. Very important for New Yorkers for our health. And also because a neighborhood grocery store, you can actually build a community around a neighborhood grocery store. It's a very important planning component. And public open space. Even these small public spaces, which happen to be my particular passion because Holly White focused on them so much, if they're so well designed so that they're inviting and well used, that means providing plentiful seating and shade and different opportunities and reasons to come, each of these can add up to make a huge difference in the city and make it much more livable. Because we have a very dense city, and these provide refuge for just refuge or for sociability. Our current focus now is on sustainable buildings. I told you that, we use 2/3 less energy than the rest of the country, but what we do use, 80% is used by our buildings. And so we really have to look at making our buildings more energy efficient. So we're looking very hard at the zoning and seeing where our zoning actually creates impediments to energy efficiency and energy generation. So things like solar panels or solar shades coming out, or even wind turbines. We want to make sure that those are, we allow those rooftop obstructions. Our goal is to create, is to emulate the Bank of America, which is the building on the left of the slide. Has no parking. It generates its own energy, and it looks gorgeous. So it really provides a kind of an ideal. So we are going to be looking at this very, very closely in the future as part of Plan YC 2.0. What we're focusing on now as well, almost all our energy is focused on the new comprehensive waterfront plan for the city. We released our recommendations. We've been working for a whole year, analyzing every reach of the city's waterfront, 540 miles of waterfront. And we released our recommendations after having a bunch of workshops all over the city. And the proposals for the future really take into consideration the fact that the waterfront has changed a great deal since our first plan in 1992. Much more public access, new 50 miles of access, our ports are stronger, and people are really engaging with the water more than they ever have before. But in this new environment of engaging the water, there are many conflicts that we have to deal with. We have a port, and we have to strengthen our port and our maritime industry at the same time as we have to provide housing for New Yorkers. We have to protect our wetlands and our habitat and our waterways at the same time as we provide this infrastructure that keep the city running. We have to use our water for transportation, both for freight and passenger movement, at the same time as we allow people to use what's human-powered boating, kayaking and rowing and recreational boats. People really, really want that. And in fact, we found that people, now that they're at the edge of the water, New Yorkers want to get onto and into the water. They are passionate about the water, and that is what our plan is going to be addressing. In fact, the water should be part of New Yorkers' everyday life. We call the water and the waterways our sixth borough, because the water should command as much attention in planning as we now give to the land. And if the water becomes that part of our everyday life, and we understand that it's no longer the land that shapes our water, but it's really the water that shapes the land, that the water becomes essential to New York's identity. And as New York embraces the water as its central identity, then we believe it will continue to be the greatest city in the world. And I thank you so much.
Wow. It's unbelievable. I mean, people used to think the Department of City Planning was just about zoning. It's really extraordinary.
Zoning plus.
These are on, right? Yeah. So we wanted to do some Q&A, and I thought I'd kick it off with a couple of questions. So you described this extraordinarily comprehensive plan, but now that the mayor has this new leadership team in place in City Hall, are there 3-4 projects that are becoming the sort of defining initiatives for the third term of the Bloomberg administration at this point?
Well, we have we actually have 3 new deputy mayors, Howard Wolfson, Stephen Goldsmith from, who used to be mayor of Indianapolis, and Bob Steele, who has a broad portfolio. And I think that they are going to be developing their own agenda, which will be revealed within the next month or so of what, and that will be part of our agenda. But speaking for city planning, I think you saw some of the priorities that we have. Certainly the waterfront plan is absolutely key to the future of the city. A broad sustainability agenda. It's not just buildings, but it's continuing with transit-oriented development. And we just were awarded consortium the Sustainable Community Grants from HUD, $3.5 million to the city, and we formed a consortium with Connecticut cities and the city's first regional effort. And we're looking at creating transit-oriented development around the Metro North lines in the Bronx and also in East New York. These are going to be models of sustainable communities, and it's tremendous to get that kind of recognition from the federal government. So it's sustainability, and it's the waterfront, and signature public open space will be very much part of our agenda. So it's the second and third phases of the High Line, and it's the what we call the East River Esplanade. We call East River Esplanade South, and I think that's part of the legacy of the administration. Those three initiatives.
It's amazing. It's interesting. The transit-oriented density, in terms of it's thinking about it regionally. How do you when you talk about the number of sort of upzonings that have been done in Manhattan versus the sort of imperative for neighborhood protection in a lot of Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island, do you feel like there are ever conflicts in terms of how much development capacity we could generate along, say, Queens Boulevard, where 4 subway lines run, or parts of the boroughs that actually could take a lot of density, but maybe you have to keep the density at a certain cap because of neighborhood preservation?
Well, we're very mindful that we still, as we say, we're going to grow by 1.1 million New Yorkers, and that was starting in the administration. We've already added almost 400,000. We have 700,000 to accommodate, and we still need to grow by about over 200,000 units. And we're very conscious that we have to grow wherever we can grow. But we actually know that we can do that because we have accommodated already over several 100,000 units in just this administration, so we only have to do about 125 per year. So the answer to your question, we still have such a great transit infrastructure that we can grow at those densities. But as you know, as you said, I walk every neighborhood, and there's just so much density that can be stomached without destroying the qualities of a neighborhood that brought people there in the first place. Right now in the Bronx, we're rezoning all along Webster Avenue, and that can take some density, but probably not more than 10 stories. Doesn't seem like much in Manhattan, but Webster Avenue, that's just about as much as you can take. On 3rd Avenue, north of Fordham Road, the most you can really take is about 8 stories there, maybe a little bit more. And so it's really a judgment of the community. We always push the envelope, but you're not going to get it passed. So everywhere we look at upzoning, it really has to reflect the innate nature of that community. And they can tell if you haven't walked it and you don't understand it. So we're always pushing the edge of the envelope to incentivize investment, but not to destroy the community.
So does the 9.1 million at 2030 represent a sort of overall cap for New York City? Do you think we can?
That's a good question.
Right. I mean, it's funny.
Then you say, like, no, the door's closed, no more.
Yeah, I mean, it's for some people, 1 million more people sounds like a lot, but in another way, when you look at cities growing around the world and the rapid urbanization that's going, I mean, is that enough to keep us competitive? Should we know by 2050 we could actually accommodate 12 million? I don't know. I'm making up numbers now, but is that a cap? Is the 9.1 a?
I mean, it's you know it when you see it. I think we can actually accommodate more growth without, and I say this, we grow but not change. I always say that because if people like up here with development, they feel like the city isn't the city they recognize, then we've lost everything. So I don't think you know until you get closer to there whether you have to put more clamps on development, but we're a long way from there now. And we want to always have the city feel like a place that you can come to and that you can, invest in, and that it's always welcome door. I mean, our population flow is so interesting. We always have like 100,000 people arriving, 100,000 people leaving, and there's this incredible dynamic mix, and we always want that to happen. But New York has to be recognizable, and I think the great thing that's happened over the past 8 years is that all neighborhoods of the city are like equally attractive. I mean, people are now living in neighborhoods that 8 years ago they wouldn't have even known the name of. Norwood, Bedford Park, each of these neighborhoods are really not only unique, but they're incredibly desirable because they have this different character. And we can't destroy it, and nobody who comes in our place should destroy it. So it's really very important to leave that legacy. So how it will feel at 9.1 million people, I don't know. That's the answer.
Have we, Sean Donovan used to talk about the fact that the pressures on affordable housing are so great because we are sort of almost victims of our own success. We are creating so many great neighborhoods for people to live in that it actually pushes prices up everywhere, and it's hard to actually talk about transit-oriented development because in a city like ours, anything that's near transit is so expensive for average people to afford to live in. Is that?
Well, also, supply should
right.
actually have an effect on prices. So the more supply you actually have on the market, it should help prices. It doesn't seem to have changed very much. But people are finding new neighborhoods. You just follow the L line out. All of a sudden Bushwick, nobody would have been living. Now everybody's living in Bushwick. So each of these neighborhoods, people are moving to because they find them affordable. And so the Bronx will be the next borough that will be the most desirable borough to live in. I'm very excited because it's more it's more affordable, and it's unique, and it has great transit lines. So.
Okay, I have one more question, and I'll turn it over to the hundreds of people who I'm sure are itching to ask questions, which is, and the question is not, were you the swimmer in the photograph? I was wondering. You mentioned LMDC with the World Trade Center site and Moynihan Station, which is obviously very heavily influenced by the state. Because of sort of home rule issues and things that happened in New York in the 70s and even before, have we ceded too much control to the state? Is it a frustrating thing to have to know that there are big chunks of city planning that happen that actually aren't in control of the city, whether it's the MTA or all sorts of the Trade Center site, whatever you want to think about? Is that something we just have to live with?
Oh, I was going to say yes to your other question. Yes, do I have a problem with it? Yes. Because we really believe that projects are much better with public input. That's not saying that. Really, really, really believe that. And going through that laborious process, that iterative process of what we call ULURP, which is the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, always, without any question, makes a better product. And it's bought into. And the community knows their community much better than like a state agency just coming in, like from outer space. And so it would really benefit. The projects would always be much better than that. On the other hand, the state owns that land, so they have a rightful interest in that land, but the projects aren't as good as they could be if there were significant, over a long period of time, and we consider that several year time, to really fine-tune the project so it really benefits the community and is better integrated with it. So.
Interesting problem. Okay, I'm sure there are many questions in the audience. Sir, from the back. And can I ask, if you're from the media, if you could identify yourself as such, I'd appreciate it.
No, I'm not from the media. I'm an alumni of
Does
Columbia.
it general?
Oh, but it'd be good to identify yourself in any case, so then I know.
My name is Juan Blanco. I'm an architect planner, product of Columbia. You mentioned that the plan is giving a great deal of importance to revitalizing the waterways of New York as a sixth borough. For me, that must include, by necessity, revitalizing and creating new ferry lines between the various boroughs from outlying regions. Well, the area of Jamaica Bay, Fort Rockaway, comes to mind as a place that could really be helped a great deal if there were a trunk line ferry that connected with Manhattan with other areas. Is that part of your plan? What is being done to foster more growth of these alternate forms of transportation that really are very significant for making people inhabit the coastlines much more than they do now?
Yeah. Not only that, but it's about knitting our boroughs together so they're one city. The Economic Development Corporation will be releasing their ferry study before the first of the year, and so I can't talk about it, but their ferry study will be making some significant proposals about water transport, and I'm sorry that I can't give you more detail, but it's their purview right now, but before the end of the year you will hear a lot.
Joey.
Wait, so, okay.
Hi, Joseph Jelinek. I'm with the MS Red graduate program. If you could wave a magic wand over Governor's Island, what would be the result?
That's such an interesting Governor's Island. You know, Governor's Island, what Leslie Koch has done with Governor's Island, I sort of call her Gulliver. She created this sleeping giant is like so alive and desirable. And the question is it still inchoate? Is it still birthing? If people are loving the experience of going to Governor's Island, I was talking to her the other day, and she had like 2 years ago, 3 years ago it was 50,000. 2 years ago it was 200,000 people came in the summer. This summer it was 450,000. So maybe it needs some time for it to settle and for people to figure out what it means to them and have New Yorkers participate in that discussion. Leslie's very intent on getting the park built, and often that's a very good way to start. It provides a sort of an armature for what should happen later. And so I think that's a good example, and I was lucky to be involved in Battery Park City, and we in fact built the little piece of the Esplanade before anything else. And so maybe that's the best thing could happen in terms of land use. There are lots of ideas, but the more people who come out to the island and actually see it, maybe that's how we get the best ideas. Maybe it's not a good thing to leap and make a decision on whether it should be academic institutions. You know, there's a prohibition against residential. I don't know if that's a good or bad idea, but I think it needs time to evolve a little bit more because it's so special. Anybody who hasn't been out there, it's closed now, but next summer you've got to go. It's totally fun. So I don't know.
Amelia?
Hi, my name is Amelia. I'm with MS Red. My question is about, you were talking about 125th Street.
Yes.
And I was wondering for that project if you work with a CDC or you work with a conservancy. And I guess I was just doing some research, and I don't really understand the difference between, for instance, like the Bryant Park Conservancy or the Empire CDC. And it seems like the planning would work with both of those types of institutions to do projects like the ones you just described.
So there's not a concern. I mean, we worked with multiple agencies worked on 125th Street, but did you say conservancy? So, did you understand the question? And so the conservancy usually is about both investing in public space and maintaining that space. The first thing we want to see happen on 125th Street is to get the development to happen and to incentivize the entertainment and cultural uses there in combination with office and housing and affordable housing. And then as it develops, they do have a business improvement district that actually is in charge of maintaining the streetscape. So actually that's their conservancy right now. But the goal is actually to foster this development which will actually embrace this cultural heritage, and that's the goal. And I know I didn't answer your question completely, but I'll give it some more thought. Thanks.
Ma'am, you had your hand up in the front. Yeah.
There's just going to be a microphone in 2 seconds.
Hi, my name is Nina Ileva, and first I want to thank you for the great presentation. And I have a question about what is your vision for a Holland Tunnel and current congestion there? There is a lot of green space which is unused, and what is your long-term and short-term solution for it?
Oh, that's a really good question for now. The Holland Tunnel is under in terms of what should happen for the transportation planning. I actually don't have a clue what should happen with the congestion at that tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel is really a problem about the number of cars that are coming into the city. And that's the first thing we have to do, is to provide other and better ways to get into the city. But in terms of the pattern of how automobiles enter the tunnel, is that your question? Or is it land use? Oh, you see, that's just and it's true. We have a problem with the jurisdiction. It was very much goes to Vishan's question. The FDR Drive and the West Side Highway aren't in control of the city. They're in control of the state. So integrating our upland community, our existing communities to better integrate with the waterfront has to deal with communication with the state and getting them to agree, because it's terrible that you have to go through this huge barrier of a gigantic highway to get to the water, and there's not adequate pedestrian passage across that highway. And so that whole area is really, but you know, it's a good idea. It's really something the city should study, and not a study, but come up with an urban design plan to better make this a better environment for pedestrians and claim what we can, and that's what Jeanette Sadikan has done, reclaim for pedestrian use areas that have been given over too much to the automobile. So that's an excellent idea, and I'm going to pursue that, I promise.
Do we think we should take another run at congestion pricing?
It may not be called congestion pricing, but the answer is yes. There will be another name for it, but it has to happen.
Sir in the back.
Hi, my name is Richard. I'm a alumni architecture. My question is regarding the 3rd Avenue, Webster Avenue corridor in the Bronx.
Yes.
I noticed there's a high density of low-income housing being concentrated there. Is there an alternate transportation solution to the Metro North for those residents? Because having lived in the Bronx, I know the Metro North is infrequent and it's expensive, especially for the people that are being concentrated in that area.
And they don't, and it doesn't run in the right direction and stopping it often as it should. As part of our grant that we just got from HUD, we'll be working with Metro North and looking at all the Metro North stops in the Bronx to have it respond better and build communities around it. So we're just going to begin the process of studying that. We just got the grant about 2 weeks ago. But you're right, it really doesn't serve the communities in the way it should, and certainly reverse commuting as well.
Just a quick follow-up. Have you considered bringing back the 3rd Avenue L as an option?
We couldn't do it if we wanted to, but no, because I think the elevators usually divide communities. And what happened along 3rd Avenue is because the L was there, all the zoning was only for auto-related uses, for auto repair shop, and that really divided the east and west sides of that community. And so I think it's really important to knit that community and not have it divided. Yes, it provided transportation, but it also made it not a desirable community to live in and invest in. So I hope our plan works.
Kate?
Hi, I love it. Yeah. I'm Kate Orff. I'm an assistant professor here. And I just wanted to say that you and your fellow commissioners have done so much to transform each of your different departments from within. I mean, redefining the street, like with Jeanette and yourself, using this sort of pre-existing tool of zoning, but in a completely new way towards completely new ends. And I'm wondering, with the new initiatives, this incredibly evocative term of the 6th borough, and also with this sustainability initiative, I'm wondering if these kinds of new future kind of trends have sparked a kind of conversation among the departments of how this sort of regulatory or governmental framework would also need to evolve to address these new kind of urban challenges, which seem to me to be incredibly interdisciplinary and interconnected.
We actually do work together all the time. We work with the transportation department, not only the transportation department, but housing preservation and development, very intricate. And in the FRESH program, we work very closely, as I mentioned, with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Also, the Department of Design and Construction, you've seen these new guidelines come out, active design guidelines. Each one of these active design guidelines are so interesting. You can look at a building. If the stairs are visible in a building, people are more likely to use them. There's so many ways that you can increase activity and health of New Yorkers by small design changes, but this is Department of Design and Construction, Department of Health, Transportation and City Planning. And so it's through the mayor. He makes sure that we all work together on all of these projects. So just to say and answer to your question, they wouldn't be so successful if there were just one department, one agency working on these challenges and these opportunities. It's because he has us make sure that we all work together and to solve these. It's a sort of ethic of the administration. You can see that if anybody's been to City Hall, you see everybody sits in a bullpen and the mayor's desk is about this big and then the deputy mayor's here and he will say, what's going on about this and what's going on about that. It's that kind of administration. I'm totally lucky to be a part of it, but nobody is in their silos. And that makes all the difference. And everybody's open to new ideas. That's the whole idea. And that's why it's really great having new deputy mayors, because they actually see it from a whole different perspective. They say, why haven't you done this? And I say, I don't know. And so we're trying everything. But I hope that answers your question.
Wow. Luke. It seems like you've been able to make a lot of changes through special zoning districts, and my question is the city eventually going to be all special zoning districts, or is the 1961 zoning resolution eventually going to reach the end of its lifespan? And because we're almost 50 years out from it, and the 1916 zoning was only about 45 years.
That is a good question. I don't know. We keep thinking there used to be this rule, no more special districts, but then each time we have a particular zoning, we couldn't have done the High Line without a special district for the transfer. And we couldn't have had a zoning bonus for the arts on 125th Street without a special district. And Coney Island, that was really special. So we have like, I don't know, so we fall, because our zoning toolbox, there are like 4 things in it, and now we have about 20 things, and we don't have enough tools in the toolbox without, and maybe we'll have more things in our toolbox that we can use for another zoning. So 3rd Avenue, Webster Avenue are not special districts. South Jamaica's not special district. So you're right, it should be used carefully and not that every district is special. But we've been trying to fine-tune each one of these places so that they're unique, and that's why we fall into a special district. It's a little bit harder to enforce, and that's the problem with the special district. So the Department of Buildings then is given, the responsibility of enforcing the zoning, and they have every district has a different rule. So you're right, we shouldn't use it all the time, but we do. Oh, a new zoning resolution. Well, when I first got this job, I can't tell you how many people said, you have to do a comprehensive plan for the whole city, and I knew if I ever did that, I would never do anything else, and it would be out of date by the time I finished it. And then to do a new zoning resolution, which you've seen, but a lot of people haven't seen. It's this horrible thing. And we actually have to reprint the whole thing this year because we were sued because the word development for us means something, a new development and an old development, but the courts ruled it only meant a new development. So everywhere in the zoning resolution that development is mentioned, we had to change the whole thing. So it occurs like 7 million times. And just the process of doing that has been, so doing a new zoning resolution, you're right, it should be done. And my successor, just tell him to do it. It would be great.
Lance.
I'd like you to speak about what you see as some of the pros and cons of using zoning to achieve these types of ends. You asked that question, for example, the city zoned many areas for manufacturing. When the underlying economy changed, the city was left with all this land was zoned for manufacturing. But this underlying economic activity was no longer there. You could imagine that on 125th Street, at some point, perhaps, the underlying economy or dynamics may change so that the incentive for arts no longer exists, but that the zoning that can be in place. So I guess what I'm asking is, what are the pros and cons of using zoning to incentivize an arts district, for example, as opposed to something like a direct subsidy or some other mechanism to achieve this?
Well, often you have to have a combination of the two things, but we only have one thing that we do at city planning. So we have, usually zoning was, you can only use it for like 2 different things. So we use it for 100 different things. It's true, you try to use it for everything, for incentivizing. Who would have ever thought zoning could incentivize healthy food choices? So we're trying to expand the use of zoning as a tool to make a better city. But they're also coupled with other incentives. So, for instance, in the FRESH program, there are also financial incentives to create an incentive for a new grocery store. So, in fact, there should be multiple incentives. So, I know zoning best, and so we use that as a tool, but always in combination with other agencies' incentives. So, HPD has its own multiple programs for affordable housing. When we pair those with zoning, the inclusionary zoning only works, this big bonus. It used to be only 20% of 20%, like 4% affordable housing. We got it to 20% by allowing HPD's programs to be used in combination with the bonus. So zoning alone is not enough. So just as a question before, it's about the partnership of agencies to actually make, 1 and 1 equals 5. So using the other incentives that other agencies bring to bear has really borne a lot of fruit. And so it's a really good question. Thanks.
For another 5 minutes or so?
Sure, I'm fine. No,
okay.
fine. Why not?
Because we got a lot of questions. In the front? Oh, that was you.
Be a zoning question, I'm not sure. The really large tower that NYU wants to build on Bleecker Street, and I don't mean this to open up the whole, can of worms on that. I'm just wondering if you could use it as an example to explain the different ends of the spectrum of development versus maintaining neighborhoods. Do you understand?
No, I understand. But okay, the Beekman, the proposed tower is part of the NYU, and that's it's not going through zoning. It's actually as of right, and it just has to go through landmarks. But I think your question is neighborhood character versus development, and as I was trying to, that's the balance, and that's what the public process, is about, because. When we started the Greenpoint Williamsburg rezoning, that was very tough for that community. We saw it as a city, as a whole. Greenpoint Williamsburg waterfront was virtually abandoned. But as a city, we knew we were growing, and that was an opportunity for 10,000 units of housing if it was pretty tall. But here's this very low-scale, beautiful community. But it had been zoned for much taller. And it took years of working with them to say, okay, we will protect and freeze the height in Greenpoint, especially Greenpoint, in exchange for development on the waterfront. We'll make sure it's a varied skyline. Each developer will have to build his piece of the water's edge. It won't get a full height unless there's affordable housing. But it took a long time for that negotiation to balance, because these are tall towers in a very low-scale community. And there were benefits. There was a chain link fence there. They couldn't get to the waterfront. But they participated in the design of the whole waterfront, the benches, the railing, and so it was a very iterative process. So it was balanced there. Sometimes it's just too much, but the community will not let it happen, because in the end, their say and their representative elected official will either vote for it or against it. So if you haven't done your job about building consensus, it's really not going to happen. So that's why I'm very big fan of this public process.
This issue of, in terms of NYU, but also, we're sitting here at Columbia, Fordham is needing to grow. This issue of institutional growth, how critical do you think that is at this point in the city's history?
So that's a really good question. We actually had a little discussion about it beforehand. The intellectual capacity of this city is its competitiveness. If we don't capitalize on the intellectual growth in New York City and foster institutional expansion, both hospital and university expansion, we will be bypassed by other cities. And nothing could be really more important, and seeing Columbia's growth is absolutely essential, and I was thrilled to have displayed a small role in that process, because that's how this city grows. It's one of the unique ways that we are competitive, and so fostering the institutional growth, and I say both hospital and university is our future, because intellectual capital of this city is so important to compete.
Way in the back, green sweater.
Hi, my name is Ping. I'm an architect with KPF. So I've been watching the designs for Hudson Yards get wackier and wackier, thankfully.
What do you think anyway?
He says he's wackier.
Wackier.
My question is about the MTA, and I was wondering how city planning is working with the MTA to ensure that the success of all these visions you have for the city, because the nature of your partnership with the MTA is kind of opaque.
You're absolutely right. It's not easy. They have a mission, and they have to be reminded over and over again that what happens above ground is critical to the economic value of this area. So the Hudson Yards Development Corporation is in charge of that area, and we are working incredibly closely with them to make sure that that park and boulevard is the best that it can possibly be, because that's the identity of that neighborhood. MTA sees that neighborhood from way down, like 6,000 feet below grade, and they need their vent structures, and they want this to be on time and on budget, and at the same time, the above grade, what that streetscape is like, is absolutely critical to the city and its economic value. So you can understand, they're interested in their focus, we're interested in our focus. So it's a constant conversation, let us put it that way.
Where do I go? Ryan.
Thanks for coming in, and thanks for coming from New York. My question is what are the low-hanging fruits that you've done for New York City that other municipalities could replicate with all their problems that they may have?
Well, say that again, the low-hanging fruit?
Where are the low-hanging fruits that you've accomplished here in New York that other cities could grab hold of to easily transform their cities?
Gosh. Well, that's a big question. So we did I'm not going to go through all the 104 rezonings, but that was, transit-oriented growth is the first. That's something that's very important. But focusing on the street, the sidewalk in the street, is how everybody judges everything. I've used this phrase, but I think it's right, is that, the scope of our ambitions is like a Robert Moses scale, but we judge ourselves by Jane Jacobs standards. And in the end, that's what we have to do. And I think that's what, you have to have ambitious plans, but if they don't have any relationship to the pedestrian and how people feel when they walk down the street, then you've totally failed. So I think those are the two principles, is like broad scale, transit, get people out of their cars, give them options, that's very important. Give them alternatives to the automobile, that's so important. The bike lanes, the tree-lined streets, the car share, all of these things that, often people use their car like once a week to do a big shopping or take their kid to a hockey game or you don't need to do that. Car shares around it. So give people options to get out of their cars. Focus on the pedestrian. Focus on biking is really important to the city. It just makes the city feel connected, and young people are out of their boxes of their cars. You go to Copenhagen. It's a very sociable city because people aren't in that confined steel box of the car. So biking, especially when all of these bike lanes get connected, that's going to change the city. And if we get bike share, that would be so fabulous. That's so all of those things, low-hanging fruit.
Okay, probably a couple more. Olympia, you had a question earlier.
I was asking about just something when you mentioned in your question, you said, say that to my successor. And, sorry. About your successor. So we are in our third term, and I believe the Bloomberg administration has started a lot of great projects. There is always space to improve, so that's why we are around the nonprofits. But you are doing, a lot of great initiatives, especially in terms of, sustainable urban development. But again, as it happened to the previous administration, the next person who's going to come, they're going to have their own agenda and priorities. And so it's a bit of a silly question, mine, because I would say, what do you want us to try to save for sure from all the things that started? Because you know in depth how the city has been changing in the past few years, and what do you believe has been the most important operations that you achieved in this administration and that they're vulnerable? And so that we should work around them and, make them stronger and make sure that they continue.
That's a really good question, because the mayor says we want to get enough done that can't be undone, so we don't want it to be undone. I think one of the legacies is going to be these quality public open spaces. I think the High Line and protecting the High Line, both Section 1 and Section 2 and Section 3 if we get it, and the East River waterfront south and north of the South Street Seaport. These legacy public spaces are really important to the city, so making sure that subsequent administrations takes care of them and prioritizes them, because very quickly, you know, the High Line could be, you know, allow access all along, and it could become a street, could become a retail street. If it's not, doesn't have a vigilant, you know, community that says, no, this is a garden in the sky, this is a park in the sky, it's not a retail street. You know, you have to protect it. So you know, the public open space is really, really important. And, you know, always focusing the development on transit areas. Don't let development go out in areas where it doesn't belong. And as I say again and again, preserving the character of neighborhoods, and don't let them get, don't let people develop them, because, and I have to mention, it's very unique to work for a mayor like Mike Bloomberg, because when he has, you know, there's benefits of having financial resources, so nobody owes anybody anything. And I've asked him, you know, lots of times saying, Mayor, what do you think I should do about this? And he always says, do what you think is the right thing to do. Now, you know, that's really incredible. So just saying that's great.
Boy, I think we can only do one more question up there. Please.
I'm Meredith Palmer. I'm an art dealer and also a concerned citizen. I'm really impressed with all you've been doing. And recently the Museum of Modern Art had a show of about the waterfront, the lower waterfront. And I was really quite concerned after seeing that. And I wonder how, I mean, the fact that we're going to lose a lot of the lower waterfront with global warming and other factors. And I'm wondering how an exhibition like that figures into your thinking, if it has an effect, and also whether you can talk a little bit more about the public process that you go through, maybe on a project like that or on the issue of the waterfront, and how, could you just walk us through sort of how you engage the public on something so important as that?
On the waterfront. The Rising Currents show was fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people here saw it. I was on the jury for it, and I just did a panel on it about a week ago, and it actually influenced our waterfront plan very much, because it was clear from that exhibit that the issues of not just sea level rise, but the real issue of storm surge, and the velocity of storm surge is makes the city very vulnerable. And for instance, the bulkheads that we built at Battery Park City is probably the worst thing you can do, because that velocity hits the bulkhead and it's not good. So what we have advocated in the plan is softening the edge. One, enhancing wetlands, not only wetland habitat, but marine habitat. In fact, one of the best ways, and you saw it in oyster texture, one of the best ways of actually slowing down that velocity of the storm surge is through creating reefs. And Governor's Island actually just lowered, the harbor school lowered their first reef into the harbor about 2 weeks ago. So we understand those issues very much, both sea level rise and storm surge. So you'll see in our waterfront recommendations, which is on our website, that's very much taken into consideration. Also in terms of how you design the water's edge, we are advocating not only soft edge, but where there's a walkway that we use riprap instead. So all of these actually feed into the new waterfront plan recommendations, and we're still getting feedback on them, so we won't finalize them until the end of the year. But the public process was very strong. In fact, we began outreach with each one. We have borough offices, with the borough offices starting last winter, and going to each community about their issues on each one of the 22 reaches of the waterfront. And then this spring and summer we held workshops in each borough, but also to do with, we called the Blue Network, the 6th borough. We held separate workshops on those. And the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance was sort of an umbrella for all of the small groups. I know the ocean swimmers. I didn't know there were ocean swimmers. You know, people who actually row boats, they felt that they were being left out. There's so many constituents for the water, and the people who work on the water. They said, like, you know, because I always say, like, how many people, you know, go birding? How many people work on the water? There were so many constituencies, passionate, knowledgeable constituencies for the water, that we've engaged them. It continues through the through web, but all of these constituencies are now part of one huge, very strong voice advocating for their different interests on the waterfront. So it's been really remarkable. It was my biggest worry, frankly, is that we wouldn't be able to engage the public at large in this plan, and it's really feeling great. So I'm pleased. Thanks.
Well, on behalf of Mark Wigley and the entire university, thank you very much for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule. It was really amazing. It was really good.